as a business, you want to maximize your productivity, but you don't want to compromise your safety. So most companies will put, certain safety rules in place, speed limits, stop signs, yield signs, flashing lights, restricted areas, in order to minimize any impact that the fork truck operating at quote max efficiency doesn't compromise safety.
There was one statistic that I saw, OSHA, the average warehouse across the U.S. Not granted, there's warehouses and big warehouses, but the average warehouse that is in existence today has an average of 454 citations worth $1.8 million. Warehouses and storage facilities. The majority of these citations involve misuse of forklifts and non-compliance with hazard communication standard for chemical safety. So I kind of want to dive into forklifts. You think like forklifts, and then you go to Home Depot and you see these forklifts operating and it's just like one guy, right? And they have it roped off. Why are forklift incidents and citations so, why is it such a big issue in warehouses?
Well, I mean, think about the utility of what a forklift does, right? It allows you to move, pallets, large components fairly efficiently. They're designed to be able to navigate in relatively tight quarters. So they're the ideal tool, if you will, in most warehouses. Oftentimes you have fork trucks that are operating in close proximity around people. You have fork trucks that, have some type of a compliance schedule to get equipment loaded onto the mode of transportation in or out of the warehouse. There's oftentimes kind of a time component, that feels pressured to speed up, if you will, to make your lift faster, to kind of be able to expedite, the shipping process. And there's a heavy involvement, with the human component and how, the human operates the piece of equipment, in the warehouse. So there's a wide range of hazards operating in close proximity to equipment, to inventory, to people, interaction with overhead cranes, interaction with inbound, outbound rail trucks. So there's a high degree of activity, and it's hard to really kind of build in protective barriers to separate activities because they have to interact with each other.
So you said a lot of cases there's pressure. So where's this pressure coming from? Is this leadership? What does that journey look like? Why is there so much pressure?
Yeah, I mean that really depends on the organization. I know that one, you have a business to operate, and the activities of a warehouse is to take and transition material from one location to another location. So you have to move things. Oftentimes a fork truck is the mode to be able to do that. There may be pressure to quote get certain volumes of material on a particular shift. There may actually be incentives that employees are paid based on the number of trips and loads that they make. So there's a variety of moving parts there that create that kind of that urgency, that pressure, if you will, to go faster.
So incentives, I mean, is that kind of a widely adopted practice, incentivizing loads for a forklift driver?
Yeah, I would say that could be pretty widely accepted. I mean, again, the goal is to move things, right? And oftentimes, building it in as part of an employee compensation is a common practice in order to reward the employee for performing, say, exceptionally on a shift and encouraging that behavior.
Interesting. So who's tracking these loads, and is there technology out there that tracks that you tie into these forklifts? How does that even track?
Well, I think one measurement could be how many trucks get unloaded per day or how many trucks get loaded per day. Because ultimately the goal is to try to move your inventory to your customer, or if you're receiving inventory, into your warehouse, to be able to get it into the location where you want it to be. So I think it could be, a variety of different ways. But I'll say this, I think as a business, you want to maximize your productivity, but you don't want to compromise your safety. So most companies will put, certain safety rules in place, speed limits, stop signs, yield signs, flashing lights, restricted areas in order to minimize any impact that the fork truck operating at, quote, max efficiency doesn't compromise safety.
So I guess if you have all these protocols in place, I mean, we're talking 454 citations on average per warehouse. If there's these safety measures already put in place, how do you manage all that, right? And clearly something's amiss, right?
Yeah. Well, I think that, if you take a step back, one, you start with a hazards assessment. Companies may call it a risk assessment, some may call it a hazards assessment. And so you actually have a formal, structured kind of analysis of your particular warehouse. And there's a lot of commonality across warehouses, but there's also unique things in certain warehouses as well. So part of a hazardous analysis would be, what's the lighting? How well lit? How uniform is the lighting distributed around my warehouse? Once I have product in my warehouse, do I have dark spots? Do I have good visibility for my employees as well as the equipment operators as they're conducting their work as well? Blind spots. If I've got areas where I'm going to have mobile equipment and pedestrians that potentially could interact, or even mobile equipment and mobile equipment interact. Do I have blind spots, and what cautions can I take around those blind spots to alert people to slow down, take some additional cautions so that you can mitigate risk? What type of activities are my employees performing? Is all of my loads being moved by mobile equipment or EOTs, or do I require some heavy lifting, awkward lifting? Maybe it's repetitive lifting. So what type of exposures does the employee directly have related to strains and sprains potentially? And then what's the exposure to sharp objects? So oftentimes there's some type of banding that goes on to pallets or materials that are being shipped out of warehouses. Are there sharp edges? When banding is removed, how is it disposed of? Is it left in the walkways, or do my employees having to walk over it? A variety of different kind of hazards related to that. And then you have the traffic flow, which can be a hazard that needs to be kind of planned out, right? So again, as we talked, we have fork trucks that are moving throughout the area. We have EOT cranes in a lot of cases that are moving through the area. You have trucks inbound, outbound, and what's that flow look like? And then you have the whole travel with EOTs potentially, and even suspended lifts when going over pedestrian areas, and how do you deal with those? And how do you permit trucks to come into the areas? Those are a wide range of, probably not all-inclusive, but a range of the types of hazards that you have to deal with in most warehouses.
Interesting. OSHA estimates something like 70% of forklift accidents can be avoided. Do you think that's an accurate number? How do you estimate that as well? Right?
Yeah, I'm sure that data is pretty solid. OSHA reports, that you have OSHA logs that include the types of equipment that are involved in the incidents with or without injury. And I'm sure that's a reasonable statistic.
So what are these types of injuries?
So the types of injuries that occur, one might be struck against, caught between. Strains and sprains, lacerations, would be probably the most common injury types that would occur in a warehouse.
So, are we talking like somebody gets cut, you have to report that? Is that like, it doesn't have an impact, throw a Band-Aid on it? Is that something that gets reported?
Well, it meets the OSHA standard, right? So if it's an OSHA recordable injury, there's a standard that defines what constitutes, recordable injury. And all companies are required to follow that. So for example, if it's just a small laceration that doesn't require any type of prescription medication or sutures, for example, in most cases that would be classified as a first aid. Most companies will actually keep that in their records, but it's not necessarily added to the OSHA log per se.
Interesting. Here's a stat. So the direct average cost to a company for a worker injury is $38,000, with indirect costs reaching $150,000. And I think we know OSHA fines are increasing every year, right? From $7,000 for minor infractions to up to $70,000 for repeat offenses. I think the average OSHA violation today is over $16,000 now. That's crazy. It seems like OSHA continues to increase the fine dollar amount, but I mean, 2.7 million people died last year from work-related injuries. It seems like the number keeps increasing. Why do you think that is? And is there something else that companies can do, right, outside? I mean, it seems like the dollar amounts aren't aligning. You see what I'm saying? Aren't aligning with the increase in deaths and work-related injuries. And maybe I could be off base here.
Yeah, no, I think those statistics are pretty solid. Where I start out with is just a core value. Safety is a responsibility that a company has to provide a safe work environment, and it's good for business, right? There's a lot of studies out there that talk about companies with good safety practices, perform well in a lot of their other key business drivers as well. So if you start with that, most companies really do care and they want to provide a safe workplace. However, these incidents can occur even at those facilities. And then there's companies out there that maybe just operate their safety program to be compliant and avoid fines. And that's their business choice to do that. But they're going to be the ones that actually would likely be the most frequently cited.